door and try to knock on the door, Gina.
I'm here.
Hi.
Hello.
Good to see you.
Yes, you too.
So that's great. So we do have some people, and I just wanted to remind you that we got a lot going on with this CAFLA network. And on the 28th, we have Sarah Shanefield. She'll be doing a presentation for you guys on finding your groove in a hybrid classroom. And then Naomi will be back on May 3rd with the second part of this series.
And I have to say, I had Erin pursue Sarah. I took a workshop from her this summer, and it was really, really well done. And she gave you ideas you could just walk away with and use automatically, even if you're teaching remote, hybrid, or you're just in the classroom and the kids are on their laptops. She's very dynamic, and it was kind of fun because she did a lot of her examples in Japanese, so you really got that feeling of what it's like to be a student. And yeah, I was like, but that's how a lot of your kids feel, and sometimes it's good to feel like they feel every now and then, and know that this is hard to do.
Awesome. So we're gonna turn it over to you, Naomi.
Okay, then I will put my little PowerPoint up. I was just saying to the other participants that I, in the chat, I put the link to this presentation on Google Slides, so that if you want to follow up on any of the links that I give in the presentation, or if you want to follow along that way, I don't know if it really matters, but in any case, you have access to it. I got so wrapped up, I forgot to go ahead and open this thing, but let me go ahead and all right. Yay, the CI mindset. So comprehensible input. This, okay, so I'll back up and tell you that I've been using comprehensible input techniques in my classroom for the over 20 years that I've been teaching. Not the first year, because I didn't know what I was doing, and so I just came in and started using a textbook, but then I went to a workshop, went to presentation by Blaine Ray on TPRS, and I just really loved what he was doing. Even though I had no understanding of what the differences were or why it was successful, what he was doing, I just had a sense that this is the right way for me to do things as a teacher. So I went ahead and incorporated those methodologies and used them. And I know I'm not the only one, even here in this group, who used storytelling for many, many years. The ideas of comprehensible input are research based. In the research over the last 20 or 30 years, this is something that has come to the forefront in terms of how how successful language teaching can happen, is by instituting this type of different instructional modalities in the classroom. And what I've found for myself in my personal journey over the last 20 years is that it really is a change in the way that you are approaching everything. It's a change in your mindset. And yeah, and Gia will know that, like, there are many times that I'm thinking, oh gosh, you know, vocab quiz, or like things come into your mind. You have expectations about what you're supposed to do as a teacher, or how you're supposed to be teaching. And many of them are wrong, and they're based in wrong thinking. And so this is an encouragement, I guess, this presentation, to change the way that you are mentally viewing what you're doing in the classroom. And I'm going to give you some rationale or reasons that back that up. This presentation is on activities and curriculum, But a lot of it is just on theory of comprehensible input instruction, and then it'll talk a little bit about activities and curriculum. The second presentation in May is going to be on understanding tasks, because tasks is a type of instructional tool that you can use, and some insights into assessment using this type of instruction and what assessment then looks like. So, so it's a refresher maybe for some of you it's a reminder, from some of you this might be a little bit new information, and I understand that. So these phrases that are used, like comprehensible input or communicative instruction, interpretive, interpersonal, presentational modes of communication in the classroom, we kind of need to integrate this mindset so that all the little decisions that we make all day long in the classroom, from minute to minute to minute, so that the big decisions we're making in terms of assessment, in terms of curriculum, so that all of those multiple decisions that teachers have to make are informed by this sort of change in your way of thinking about what you're doing. It's really all about asking why am I doing this activity, to really understand for yourself what the point of what you're doing is. What am I trying to accomplish here? What am I trying to assess? What's the student's takeaway from this, whatever I'm setting up for them? And then examining that in the light, of comprehensible input, and verifying for yourself whether this is the appropriate way for you to be spending time in the classroom. So there's this strong research framework over the course of the last 20 or 30 years that back up what I'm putting in this presentation. I have not put in citations for anything in the presentation. Most of what I'm saying at the beginning comes from this textbook by Bill Van Patten. It's not really a textbook, it's actually an incredibly conversational little book published by Actful called While We're on the Topic. And I highly recommend it as a book for people to read to get a better understanding about ways of approaching things, about changing, as I say, this way of looking at things mentally. Just because you're being exposed to ideas of comprehensible input doesn't mean that you're going to be using this every single day in your classroom for every activity that you do. But it does help you to evaluate when what you're doing is really using the language in a way that helps students to acquire the language, as opposed to giving students opportunity to practice language in your classroom. Giving students opportunity to practice language in your classroom is not helping them to acquire the language. And that's like, it's like a really hard thing for us to wrap our mind around. So I saw the note, and I think that's a wonderful idea that this book can be purchased from Actful. They're the ones who publish it. So, oh gosh, now I get to advance a slide. Woo! Oh, it's on this computer. I have these two computers set up because it's helpful for me to see who's here and see whatever. But anyway, okay. So, in fact, this one, I don't need this here at all. That's right. There you go. I forgot about that. Sorry, you don't need to be looking at yourselves. So what is communication? If you're, we say we teach communicatively. I think communicative language instruction has been the order of the day for, over 30 years. We say we're teaching communicatively, and that's what's required of us by New York State. It's the kind of language that you hear. So to think to yourself, what is communication? This is a definition of communication that has been developed by people involved with language instruction. So communication is the expression, interpretation, and sometimes negotiation of meaning within a given context, and communication must be purposeful. So all those elements need to be present for it to actually be communication, and not just kind of like words out there in the air. Expression doesn't even need to be words. Communicative expression can be visual. It can be me typing a whole bunch of little emojis in. That's That's expression. It can be, you ask me, how's my day? And I say, it's like, that's expressive. It's not language, but it's an expression. Interpretation. There's always an idea of a two-way street in communication. There's always like a recipient of the information as well as the person giving the information. And then that's where the negotiation happens because interpretation is not always 100% accurate. Negotiation is us explaining ourselves, is checking for meaning. Do you understand what I mean? With another person, that's negotiation. Meaning is the information. So something like, the sun isn't shining today. That's information. It's 3:40 in the afternoon. That's information. But if you're like, what are you doing at school? It's 3:40 in the afternoon. Well, that's a completely different way of saying it's 3:40 in the afternoon. Looking outside and saying, God, yesterday was so beautiful. Today the sun isn't shining. Again, a whole bunch of intent and meaning, a whole bunch of meaning gets layered in there in any kind of meaning. So when you say meaning, there's all that read between the lines meaning that is also part of meaning, in addition to just the factual, the evident, what's on the surface of the statement. Context. Context is the physical setting that you're in and the people that you're participating with. Context has a huge influence on what we communicate, how we communicate it, what meaning comes across. If I'm, sitting in the backseat of a car on a 2-hour-long trip, next to my best friend and we're chatting, there's going to be a whole different type of communication happening than if I'm sitting with my best friend and we're at a presentation and we're trying to pay attention to a lecture and, we might whisper to each other occasionally. Context influences hugely what happens in terms of communication. Our context never changes. When we're teaching, we're in the classroom. It's a bunch of students and us, and that's who is there. That's what our context is. So what kind of meaning then can we negotiate in the very limited context of us and the students within the the 4 cement walls of the classroom? This is, a challenge for us. Communication is also purposeful. There are 2 different purposes communication can have. Either it is informational, communicative, informational, like it is, 3:40 in the afternoon or the sun is not shining, or it's psychosocial, which actually those comments could be too. It depends on how they're meant. If I'm giving communication just to be supportive of another person or to inquire about them as a human being, how are you doing? That's not really meant as an informational question. It's really meant as a psychosocial support of another person. So those are the 2 things that we do with communication, either psychosocial communication, reach out to other people, or communicative informational, establishing and affirming our relationships through psychosocial, and exchanging or obtaining information through communicative informational. And language without any kind of purpose is not communication. We see language without any kind of communicative purpose, around, but it doesn't make it communication. For example, the language that's on your computer keyboard where it says caps lock, that's giving you information, but it's not communication, okay? Because there is no negotiation of meaning. There's no changed language in context. There is a sort of purpose, I guess, in telling us caps lock. All right, if anyone gets bored or whatever, you can raise your hand, I think, right? Or something if you want to stop me from talking. I think if you do chats, I see them come up over here. So classroom implications of all that I just said about the definition of communication. I think first of all, we have to understand that we're working within the classroom context. And you accept the context, and you use it with authenticity. And this one is kind of a hard one because, for example, a lot of people like to do role plays, like to say, okay, we're in a restaurant, and if we're in a restaurant, you're the waiter, and then you like order food, and it's a chance for people to be able to practice language, ordering food in a restaurant, even though we're not in a restaurant, and the students are not eating in a restaurant, and they're not paying a restaurant bill, and none of those students is a waiter. That's a way of practicing language. And I'm not saying that it's not something that any of you would or could do with your classroom time, but it is also not a communicative event, and it is not something that allows students to acquire language. So we're not pretending that we're in a different situation than what the situation we are in, the context that we are in. If an adult is talking to a bunch of students in other classrooms, it's because they're teaching a subject. So if you go into a biology classroom, you find a person talking about biology. If you go into a math classroom, you find someone talking about math, and it's a clear communicative context, you know, of like teachers and students together. But we don't have that in a foreign language classroom because we do not talk about the language to our students. What you're doing is talking in the language to your students. You're using the language. So I forget, I had some little phrase for this before. You're using the language. You're not practicing the language. So that makes our task incredibly different, incredibly difficult, very, very different from other types of subject materials. If our purpose is not practicing language, then we have to come up with any of these other purposes that we might have for being involved communicatively with our students. Could be we're sharing stories, could be we're discussing literature, could be we're talking about what people did over the weekend, could be comparing experiences, exploring cultural differences, understanding history. Any of those can be the purpose for the language we're using in the classroom. Why do I say that we're not teaching language? There are a lot of reasons for why we're not teaching language. One of those is that if you think about, like, this is just one example, it's a kind of silly example, but there is no way that you would teach a language learner of English this order of what the proper order for adjectives is. And yet, if you mess with that order, any English-speaking person will immediately understand that there's something wrong with the order. That is incredibly complex to say that this is the order in which we place our adjectives. And yet it's true that if you mess with it, it sounds weird. It just makes English sound funny. But that's not a rule. I can't communicate that rule to students. That would be cuckoo. The rules that are in textbooks that govern language do not match the system of meaning that is in people's heads. Oh, good. I'm glad you like that example. I just came across it the other day. I was like, oh, great example. So language is abstract. Abstract. You cannot describe what language is. If you want to describe what language is, then you end up becoming a linguist, and you're talking about language in a way that is so incredibly hard to understand with very specialized vocabulary. Nobody needs to become a linguist to be able to speak a language. So describing a language is not something that helps you with understanding what a language is. Linguistics captures these abstract constructs and names them with vocabulary that then has to be defined. But it doesn't help us to understand. It doesn't help you to speak the language. language is complex. There are many, many, many different components going on. While you're hearing me, your mind is processing the sound. It's, examining my pronunciation. It's understanding what the words are, what the meaning of the words, the structure of the words, the syntax, the relationship of words to each other, the rhythm of my language, the tone of my language, the intent. You're trying to understand that, read between the words, meaning that I'm also putting out there. Is it a statement? Is it a question? Is it like an inference? What are you? You're hearing all this stuff at the same time and processing it. It's an incredibly complex experience, and it happens in our mind in this implicit, weird way, right? You're not doing that with any kind of conscious awareness. There is no explicit understanding. It is completely implicit. It is hidden inside your mind. So we have intuitions about the way this system of meaning stuff in our minds is working, but it's very difficult to put those intuitions about what this system is that we use, this communicative system, into words. We know what sounds right, we know what looks right, but we cannot really actually describe it in ways that are open to any kind of layperson understanding. What are the classroom implications for that, for the fact that language is abstract, complex, and implicit? So language, this mental representation is too complex and abstract to be learned explicitly. Each of us is creating this mental representation inside your head, and you may have the experience, even of talking to other native speakers, that sometimes people have built their own mental representation of the language that we share that's slightly different. And when you're working with your students, you're going to be helping them to build their own mental representation of Spanish in their heads. We create this abstract, complex system in our heads. Language is the stuff in our minds. Communication is the external use of this very internal system. Language is not the rules and the paradigms that we have on our textbook pages. The explicit rules are not the abstract, implicit representation that we have in our heads. And the problem is that they're both very valid, but the one does not become the other. And for many years, I think people are used to thinking that if we build this explicit understanding of what the language is about, then it becomes the implicit mental representation. And that's exactly the issue that's confronted by comprehensible input instruction. That does not happen. Language acquisition happens in a very slow way. We know that from our frustrations with teaching. In a very piecemeal way. People are picking up little bits and pieces and putting it together in different ways in their head. It does follow stages, but those stages are not stages that are really useful for us in instruction at all. For example, in Romance languages, acquiring, like completely understanding, acquiring, having it inside you, masculine and feminine nouns, is something that is very late acquired. You can be swimming in the language. You can be using the language for years before you actually really acquire that aspect of the language. But you can't put off teaching that. Of course, you have to be making sure that students are getting plenty of examples of it and understanding it. But you also can't expect that they've mastered it after their first year just because it was present in your first year of instruction to them. That's one example. There are many examples of different aspects of the language that are just like fundamental to the language, and yet they're not acquired quickly. Some of the things that are the simplest in a language that we think, oh gosh, that's really simple, masculine, feminine nouns, come on. it takes learners a long, long time to have that really in their minds. Explicit instruction, this is the frustrating part. Explicit instruction does not influence acquisition of language. You can teach something like masculine and feminine nouns over and over again, every day, day after day, and day out, day in, day out. Explain it, explain it, explain it, explain it. That's not going to have an influence on when students in their own time have that as part of their mental construct of the language. All you can do is provide them with meaning, purpose, and context in your communication with them. And when they get it, they get it. When they're ready to acquire it, they acquire it. Any different feature of language, preterite, imperfect, anything that you would want to explicitly teach, students are not going to get it until they're ready to get it. And every student is on their own little continuum of when that sinks in and makes sense in this mental representation they're building in their minds. Nothing guarantees, ciao Gina, thank you for being here. Nothing guarantees acquisition. So in other words, you can teach and teach and teach and the student is there and there and there, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to acquire anything. But the only way you can be sure that acquisition does happen is through allowing that universal grammar. If you're familiar with the Noam Chomsky, that concept of the universal grammar that operates within your mind, to operate on comprehensible input. And as a result of that mechanism in your mind that makes sense of this, that builds this mental construct, as a result of your mind doing that operation, students acquire language.
I see that you're talking even saucier about the meaning of the word and that. I just went through the linguistic. It's a whole full course in linguistics. Now, but when you are, let's say, for example, when I learned English, I was in the language. I was here. So the comprehensive input, I didn't have it. I have to acquire as much faster as I can. The meaning and the significant was not there. It wasn't breaking that pattern. I mean, it was a lot of noise, but it's no meaning in my mind. So it was no word. So when we talk about comprehensive input, how we can put it in the way that to speed the process, that the significant can be the significance. I don't know, I took this in Spanish in the course. So
I'm going to talk in a little bit about ways that we can do that, the ways that we can link meaning, into the words so that students can be building that representation in their mind. I think that's what you're talking about. So,
I don't know if I pronounced well. He was a French guy that was the father of the linguistic. That I said significado tiene que tener un significante. So basically, whatever form is something
signified in the signifier. Yes, I know what you're talking about a little bit. Right.
So later, Chomsky said, no, they have to the universal grammatical universe. So everything is in your brain that you develop in the way that you talk. Hey, even one or the other is fine. Let us come in, Crasher. That Crasher is probably one of the different way to approach. So there are some theories that in the linguistic approach that they are very exciting, very interesting, but sometimes they're theories. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So what I guess coming from my background of trying to understand as well as I can possibly how to be a good language teacher, what has interested me is in reading and studying about the people who it has seemed to me were on the path that again seemed to me to be the strongest and clearest. So for me, I can't say that I've read much Chomsky, but certainly I've received information about what he was communicating, how he was analyzing how people learn language. but I'm not interested in a lot of the whole, grammatical analysis, and I'm not interested in being a professor of linguistics. What
Yeah, because-
interests me is like what Creation has said about him, what Bill Van Patten says about him. The thing that interests me is, I guess, what can be practical for me in the classroom. So I know that this presentation right now is a little bit theoretical, but I think it's because, to some extent, it's a good reminder for us about what language is, how communication happens, what language is, and what we're trying to have kids develop in their heads.
For me,
Does that make sense?
For me, a work is bigotsy. I don't know if I say in this in English, because it's socialization. So you use the language, socialize, and you improve. That's one of my theory. The universal grammatical, I think it's there, but I don't know if I can put it together or not. I have to go for the linguistic, subject verb now, because this will make sense for me.
Every one of us is going to do what makes sense for us in the classroom. And I think I told you about that when I talked to you before.
Oh, yeah.
You do what's strong for you. You do what works for you. And even when I'm saying, like, if you set up a role play in the classroom, you're not helping your students to acquire language. Okay? I believe that. But I also believe that doing a role play in the classroom can be extremely fun for students. It can be something that is a strong part of your instruction. It can be something that may help students to acquire different aspects of vocabulary or language.
Yeah.
It's not fitting the definition of the type of task or activity we want to be doing right now, in the New York syllabus. But it doesn't mean that, hey, if that's the way you like to teach, then that's how you like to teach.
I put it universal because, for example, with the role play, which I don't use that because I'm not very into. In role play, you put it on some clear input because they have to read and script. So the
it's
input,
not input. None of it is input. None of it is input.
They know the vocabulary, so they make sense for them. So the significant is going to be the significant. So whatever is there, they're going to make sense for them. They're going to put in practice. They're going to socialize because the play can be a little bit fun for them. So they're going to socialize. They're going to make mistakes, but they're going to.
And that's a bad example for you. That's a bad example for you if you don't ever use role plays in the classroom. What you do in the classroom is you give grammatical explanations, and you're comfortable with giving grammatical explanations. Am I right?
So you do a storytell. That is a role play.
So what I'm saying, I do not do role play, okay? And I don't even do storytelling right now in the classroom.
I talk in general now.
I guess I feel like it doesn't matter what you do in the classroom.
I don't
As
talk
long as it's
general.
as long as it's hitting a certain purpose. Okay, and so what I'm trying to do right now is explain kind of like what the purpose would be, how you're evaluating. When I started out, I said, what I want to try to help people is to examine their own teaching and to look at it and say, okay, what's my purpose in doing this particular activity? What's my purpose in setting up this task? What's the point? What are students going to get out of this? How exactly am I assessing them? And to just kind of give you a chance to reflect and see how much that aligns.
I don't want to Naomi, I don't want to this between Naomi and Daniel. I'm talking in general. I'm talking about whole entire approach, because Chomsky didn't talk about me, talk about the language approach. And, and what I want in general, that's what I want to compare. Because I follow what you're reading through. I want to compare with the real life, let's put it this way, because some theory that I read, I have in my mind, I need to put in practice because some theory is only theory. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. So at the end,
so for example, because they say, okay, this and that, but when you put in practice, you can get it. So
let's just hold on a minute then, Dan.
All right,
okay?
all right.
And let me keep talking a little bit, and then we'll look at some like more practical things at the end. Okay. So where was I here? So yeah, that fact that nothing that you do in the classroom can guarantee acquisition. I think that's a very frustrating thing for teachers to admit that even though you have a student in the classroom who's in there every day and you're doing all kinds of things and presenting all kinds of fabulous comprehensible input, you are not guaranteeing that your student is acquiring the language, because it is such an individual thing. And it is such an individual way in which your students' brains are interacting with this material. This, language making mechanism is something, that is very individual. However, the only way that your student is going to be able to do that is by you providing the comprehensible input. Giving them input that's embedded in meaning is the only way that happens. Comprehending messages is how that happens. So let's just keep going on. There are some things that we can do. First of all, the people in teachers are incredibly generous and wonderful people. Most of the information so far that I've been sharing, I've gotten from the Bill Van Patten book. He also has the Tea with BVP. I think many of you are familiar with that, the podcasts. They share information on the special interest group of ACTFul. They have a little blog where they share information. There are many, many people on YouTube and different presenters and different bloggers who are sharing their own insights and ideas and activities with other teachers. An incredibly generous community that I have benefited from. This little list is from Martina Beck's on her blog. She made a cute little graphic reminder too of this kind of thing. But these gives you some techniques that you can use to be looking at is you're teaching something that your students are understanding. If you look at them in the eyes, if you look in their eyes and say, are their eyes showing that they understand me? It's a good way for you to silently be checking for whether students are understanding. Circling is incredibly strong. You take a statement and you break it down and ask questions about different parts of the statement, confirm the statement. I went to the store. Did I go to the store? Yes, you went to the store. Did I go to the store or the zoo? Oh, you went to the store. Interacting with your students in that way gives them the ability to be acting like it's a real conversation and really interacting with you, but again, in a contextualized way. Asking question words, asking follow-up questions, why something happened in a certain way. Constantly asking, do you understand what I said? What did I say in English? How would you say this word in English? Is a great way to make sure that your students are understanding what you think they're understanding. And then this also links over to personalizing, asking questions that then end up being ways for you to personalize it to your students. I went to the store. Did you go to the store? Where did you go yesterday? Is ways for students to be able to share about their lives. Going really, really slow, slower than you think you need to go. Using your own vision, like gazing at something, pointing to something, walking over and pointing to a poster in the classroom, setting up those frames around you if you're presenting on PowerPoint or on Zoom or on Teams, so that you can point to different words around you and give people a chance to process those words. Doing things that are in a way that's slow enough to give students time to process what you are saying is really, really necessary. And I don't even think I ever go slow enough myself personally. This is a skill that I'm constantly trying to work on. Rephrasing what you're saying so that you're giving them the same content in 3 different ways of saying something. Simplifying words so that you start from the very simplest concepts and you can layer in more and more words as your students are ready for it. Sheltering vocabulary. They talk about there being a sweet 16 verbs. So you could probably express just about anything you need to in the classroom, primarily using those 16 verbs. If your students are able to acquire those 16 verbs over the course of a couple of years of instruction, that's wonderful. Not sheltering grammar. giving your students the opportunity to hear all the different ways in which the verb ir shows up, you know, in present, in past, in future, in conditional, in subjunctive, and having them understand that that is all related back to the same verb is more beneficial to them than saying, oh no, I better not use that sentence that I'm thinking of because it's subjunctive and they won't understand it. Giving them as many opportunities to understand the different forms of those words that are most frequently used is extremely beneficial. Make sure you're doing what you can to link the meaning to their first language. It can be through pictures, through visuals, contrasting meaning. I wasn't doing this, I was doing that. I didn't go to the store, or I didn't go to the zoo, I went to the store. I didn't go to the salon. You're just repeating the same information over and over again, giving them more and more and more information to opportunity to hear the meaning in their heads. Pop-up grammar, meaning that in very little ways you can address grammatical questions with them. Even by like doing that kind of contrasting. I went, John didn't go, I'm the one who went, you know, I lived, you live, and making sure that people are hearing, like in Spanish, that they're hearing the O on the end, you know, yo, whatever, hablo, you know, and tú hablas, that they're hearing those little things, but in a very quick, brief kind of way that's in the middle of the meaning that you're creating. Personalizing, making things more compelling to students because it's about them and their lives. There's a little saying that we remember what we feel, making people feel good about themselves, valorizing their experiences is an important way for students to make that connection in your classroom. Linking visuals or sounds, the expression on your face, the tone of voice, gestures, pictures, props. People who like to do acting can do more acting kind of stuff. If you don't like to do acting, then you do it in a different way. People who like to draw pictures can draw pictures. People who don't feel comfortable drawing pictures can find pictures. Practice. There's a little thing on this blog that says on average, it takes 66 days to form a new habit, but it's anywhere from 18 to 244 days. So if you wanted to, let's say, incorporate just one of these ways of communicating, ways of checking communication with your students, just wanted to use more teaching to the eyes, it would take you 66 days of using that skill, at least, probably, before you felt comfortable, before you feel like this is part of your teaching tool belt. It takes a lot of practice, practice with intentionality and practice with faith and conviction to make these changes happen. There are two like little cheat sheets. The one on the left is from Mike Pito. He has a blog too where he gives insights into his use of comprehensible input instruction techniques in the classroom. The one on the right is from Martina Beck's. I used to have it printed out and like in front of me on the table constantly, so I'd be remembering to, again, to practice, to incorporate these things into my instruction, because it does take a long time even for you as a teacher to, and it also, you can forget about one of them. Maybe you forget about rephrasing, and so it's useful to have it sitting there in front of you because you're always like linking back to English. Oh no, maybe instead of just always linking back to English, I can just keep trying to rephrase it. And that little like language frame or something is good. This is a quote that I really like, because a lot of times people also think that this type of instruction means that you're being theatrical or that you're on a stage, but you're really not. It's not about theater. It's not about keeping people amused. It's kind of helping your students to understand what social interactions are all about. You're encouraging them, you're building the life skill of being in communicative engagement with other people. You're helping them to gain empathy for humanity. You're helping to model curiosity by engaging your students in these communicative events. So, so I liked that quote. This is what I was talking about a minute ago, Dan. These are all different types of techniques that are used in a communicative, classroom. You don't need to use all of them. You don't need to use, any more than a few. You use the ones that are really, that make sense to you. But it's really good if you have part of your classroom every day. Students are reading, students are listening to the target language, and students get an opportunity to write in the target language. Even though we're not focusing on skills anymore, it's useful to incorporate those different things.
What is readers theater? I don't know, what does that mean?
Readers theater, you can Google it, but what happens is, like, if you've read a book or a story together, giving students then the opportunity to act it out or to read parts out loud, that would be a readers theater type of activity to do with reading. Again, it gives additional input in reading with meaning, because they've understood what's happening, and now they get a chance to sort of incorporate it into themselves, into their own bodies and their own voices. So these are all like Googleable techniques, and I've also included a slide at the end of the Google document that I sent out with direct clickable links that discuss, I think, most of these techniques, if not all of them. And we can talk about any one of them a little bit more, but let me just also share with you another thing that recently I've been seeing. Again, it's just like I do a lot of like reading and looking around in terms of what's happening. And so what we're really talking about here is instruction that is not tied to a textbook, because I think there are some textbooks that are more like infused with comprehensible input instructional techniques, but much of this ends up being things that are created by teachers, or by teachers for other teachers, or by teachers themselves. And it's interesting to me, and I just thought I would share it, is that I feel there are three big different kinds of approaches that teachers are using in terms of developing their curriculum. One of them is to just use the New York State syllabus topics as like the structure for instruction, and take a different theme, and each quarter is devoted to a different theme, and you have the sub activities that you could use: identity, contemporary life, science, tech, arts, engagement. Those are things that at different levels of instruction, they can be approached in a completely different way. Identity for a 7th grader is just being able to say, oh gosh, I'm not going to say it in Spanish, j'ai les cheveux bruns, or something like that, talking about describing themselves in a very simple way. That's identity. Identity for somebody who's in a Spanish 5 classroom is something that's extremely much more complex, that might have much more to do with exploration of the self than in a simple way. But it's all talking about identity. The other approach that many people are using falls into a kind of a camp that I'm putting together as literacy-based approaches. So the traditional Blaine Ray storytelling or Benico Mason's story listening fall into this type of approach to developing a curriculum. The PACE grammar lessons are very much like what you do in storytelling, that you decide on target grammar forms that you want to use, and then you develop materials that highlight those grammar forms. So you're doing it in a communicative way, you're doing it through reading and talking, but you're doing it in a way which is very much conscious in terms of the types of grammar forms that you're exposing students to. Stepping Stones is Tina Hargaden's book, the ANATI, she calls it, a natural approach to teaching, in a year, or Stepping Stones are her two publications. She has published a whole curriculum on Teachers Pay Teachers, and her curriculum is very much based from a language arts instructional background, that teaching people how to describe things, how to express their opinions, how to make comparisons, all of those things that you would find in an English language arts classroom as well. So the literacy approaches, yes. It would be wonderful to be able to attend her summer camp if you buy into that approach, which is really strong and really good. I think I'm using a lot of her stuff in the classroom this year. There's this other third thing that is developing right now in terms of world language instruction, which is using social justice issues as your entire curriculum. It comes up under the syllabus topics, New York State syllabus topics, under engagement, issues of social justice. But in the New York State syllabus, it's considered that those issues are something that's for a checkpoint B or checkpoint C kind of level, that these are higher level topics because you're engaging people in things that are kind of controversial or thinking about contemporary current events. I think if you're tending toward looking at a social justice, I don't know, glasses, right? That you're coloring your whole curriculum with understanding social justice issues, then it doesn't matter from 7th grade all the way through 12th grade. What you would be involving students with is historical issues, is issues of cultural importance and interest. And you, again, can tailor that to your students at whatever level they are at. There are two different things happening this summer, this year. The California World Language Professionals or something, they're giving a whole workshop this summer in the socially just world language classroom for NECTFL in 2021. This issue of social justice is actually going to inform their whole conference that they do. So I think it's kind of interesting that, and kind of, I didn't even talk about this. Oh, it's probably one of those technique things. I should put it under that umbrella. But using the CALP instruction that is really just teaching students about other things, teaching them history in Spanish, teaching them, about the constellations in the sky in Spanish, using Spanish as the mode of instruction, but the actual content is something that has to do with social sciences or history or science or literature or any of a bunch of different academic type discipline topics. And that's it. The last slide is the one that I said I have all these clickable links. So again, if you're interested in Reader's Theater, there's like a little link that you could click on, you know what I mean? That would give you more information about that. Content-based instruction is what I was talking about just now. Integrating the content study in with your language instruction. So, oh, good. I hope this is useful in some way to people. So that's my curated list of links. I think all the links work. I was like clicking on them last night to make sure they all work. Let me know if you need anything else. And I'm kind of open right now to like talking or discussing more about, I think we only have like 5 minutes left or something, but Daniel, if you have other questions about like maybe some of those techniques, I wanted to go back to
Naomi, in your next one, I know, because I looked, your 2 parts, and the next one is more the hands-on approach thing. Could we like send you, I'd love to see somebody do a calendar, do the calendar talk for us. Could we just kind of send you the idea, some things that we would like to know more about? I know Mindy's sitting down there. She does a great movie talk.
I know.
So I would like, there's some things that I would like to see. But my other thing I want to throw out that you hit that I think is so interesting how comfortable do people feel about the whole social justice as part of your classroom? I know, like, yes, I teach history, I teach, these are things that are in the news, but there's that whole thing about teachers being, especially during this last election, that we're supposed to be so impartial. We're supposed to, how do we get around social justice and not like put my heart on a sleeve? This is my opinion. And I just kind of want to throw that out to other people. How do they feel about that? And how do you stay neutral and do social justice?
I used to teach IB, which, do you know who is pretty good?
Yeah.
Mrs. Black, she's pretty good with the IB training. In IB, you have to teach about social injustice and that kind of method. Because there's something about that. I guess you gotta be impartial like you are. You teach,
I think it can mean a lot of different things too. Like social justice, you think right away, oh, George Floyd or something, you know what I mean? You got to talk about like big issues going on in the classroom. And that's certainly something that might be part of it if a teacher is comfortable themselves with doing that. But for example, I would consider this to be like a social justice type of thing, that right now with my 8th graders, I introduced a story. Back in the fall, we had done a little bit about Joan of Arc, just to introduce her as a cultural figure to students who have no idea, God, 8th graders who have no idea who Joan of Arc is, so that, but like, there's this other woman, a woman back in like 1300, early 1400s, who was writing books. And she wrote this whole book about the validation of all the great women in history. I was like, who knows that this kind of thing exists, unless you're like a medieval scholar. But so I read this article about her and it's just fascinating. And the book that she wrote, so I'm talking to students about this lady who lived back in like 1420. She wrote this book called La Cité des Dames, and it's a valorization of all the great women throughout history. And she wrote it because she was angry about the representation of women in literature that she was reading, because she loved to read. So that's social justice. Because what I'm doing is saying that it's, first of all, it's okay to talk about a woman. It's okay to talk about, issues that are important to women. It's okay to talk about a culture that has been misrepresented and show ways in which it can be represented in a positive way, and show that this, has happened historically. Do you see what I'm saying? So that's not social justice like, oh, contemporary event, a trial going on right now. But it also helps students to frame what potentially could be a new society where everybody is validated. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I just, the picking and choosing and, that it's overwhelming. It is overwhelming.
I know that, for example, Stephanie, in IB, they gave you some parameters. So you have to do some social issues, like recycle. I used to teach the Latino, which I use a movie, which is called Walkout. I talk about the movie, but I have to attach with my curriculum. So it's a huge movement that was in the South for the Latino community in the United States. But I have to give validate meaning input and put it just, attached with my curriculum. I can, I teach some point in my life about, I used to live in Rochester. Rochester is a lot of poverty. So, and later on I moved to a very good school. So they didn't understand the struggle that people that don't have money. So, that's what I was saying. But I was very, very careful, Stephanie, what I was saying. I let them more talking than what I talk, because parents can be a little like, I don't want to hear that. That's what I'm thinking. I don't know. What are you thinking, Naomi, about that?
I was just thinking that there's just so many ways, like even, okay, So there's this series on YouTube. You guys can find it. I'm actually using it in my Italian 102 that I'm teaching at the university right now. Even though it's not all in Italian, it's these people speaking in all the languages of the world. I love it because you're sitting there listening and it's like there's a Cambodian and then there's an African speaking in some tribal language and then they're speaking French and then they're speaking Chinese and it's like, whoa, you know, so it's like all these different languages. It's called 7 Billion Others is the name of the series. And you have these people speaking for maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute, maybe 2 minutes or 3 minutes on a different topic. And so like what came to my mind that I had just been looking at last night, what was the topic that they were talking about? It was talking about dreams and regret. And so this one woman is sharing that, oh, no, it wasn't, it was differences. It was talking about social differences. So that's what the series is called, differenze in Italian. I don't know what it would be, you know, but I think they have it translated into Spanish and English, and I'm sure you could find this in Spanish. Anyway, point is, thank you, Susan. Thank you. It was great to see you, Signora Knight. Is that there's this one woman, and she speaks about the experience when she was young, how she was experienced prejudice because she was a girl who went to the dumps and who like looked for plastic in the dumps. And that was how she made money. That was how her family made money when she was little. And so she experienced prejudice and discrimination as a result of that. Thinking this is a tiny little clip. She's not, maybe she's speaking Spanish. I'm not sure what country she was from, you know, but it's a tiny little clip of this woman sharing an experience from her youth about experiencing discrimination. That could lead to so much more about understanding, well, what happens to plastic? And what is the recycling thing all about? On the one hand, you know, that, and how can we be encouraging people to like be rummaging through garbage dumps to find plastic, you know, and then the whole thing of the discrimination against this girl, that this is just something, this is how she grew up, that she was discriminated against because of what her parents, so it's like all this stuff. Does it hit what you need to do for IB in terms of talking about recycling? Tangentially, if you put that together with like 5 other different topics you're doing, and it doesn't all need to be in a row, and it doesn't need to be, okay, March is recycling month. It can be something that comes up in different ways over the course of the year. Yeah, of looking at, again, if what you were going to use is social justice to inform your curriculum. I think people I think we have to, you know, we're limited people as teachers. We work with what we have. We work with the text materials, the textbooks. We work with, you know, curriculum materials that we find, but you also bring yourself to it. And those things that you find on your own that are interesting to you, that's the most powerful thing that you can bring into the classroom. And you don't need to be scared and say, oh, I can't do this with 7th grade because it's just much too complicated. You just figure out a way to be able to allow 7th graders to access some part of it.
So Naomi, if as a summary, for example, if I said comprehensive input is the technique to bring the student meaningful for each word, how you can define that, like a.
So this is a weird thing too, because this whole thing about, of course you can make it comprehensible. You can bring in a college textbook in Spanish to your 7th grade classroom. You can make it comprehensible by translating every word to them, but that's not comprehensible input.
Yeah, but how do you put in concept? What is comprehensive input?
How would I put it in
definition?
I put it in words? Is presenting information. You do it, Mindy.
I was just gonna say, it's just making sure that the words that you use in the classroom are understood by the kids. That, what is it, 90% or 95%? Because there's this, I don't know if you've ever seen it, Naomi, but they take it even with English and show you like a paragraph where you might understand like 70% and just kind of show you how it works. So you can take that college text and then rewrite it for a 7th grade level, and it won't have as many adjectives, or it won't have as many difficult verbs or things like that. So it's just taking the things that you use and making sure everyone in the class, or what is it, 80, I don't remember how many people need to, you find your barometer student, like a student that you might see struggle, and you make sure they understand it, and then everybody else does as well.
Okay, so
They used to say 80%.
It is a technique, and there's lots of things, and there's lots of different ways in doing it. And it focuses more on the information rather than the, I mean, grammar and structure is part of it, but it's not the be all and end all. And I
No.
think I was just going to jump in because I think that's where New York State's headed anyway, with this
Yes.
whole new shift with, and it's all, because I went to the one conference in January last year before everything shut down, where it's more about teaching things in the language than it is about teaching the language. And that's the shift that New York State's making.
Yeah, we're headed for the integrated performance assessments. And I kind of like she was talking about the video about the girl, is that's what she would start with. And then you would build your tasks from that.
Okay.
And so you take that one little thing and it becomes 2-3 weeks worth of information from this one little 2-3 minute video.
You just have to be
And I
so
think that's
careful
where we're
because,
headed.
Like
Well, I
I've
was gonna say,
seen,
that's different than what they explained at the one conference that I went to. It was more about some of the things. I don't know if any of you look at Carrie, I don't know how to pronounce her last name, Toth. Her Somewhere to Share thing is kind of the same principles. Martina Bex is headed there a little bit as well, where it's more about something rather than the language. The language is
content-based
part
instruction.
of it, but yeah.
It's content-based instruction is
I
that,
mean,
that you're doing content with the students. It's just, it happens to be in Spanish instead of in English.
because for me, let me put it this way, for me, I just took a course through the University of Puerto Rico to refresh the linguistic approach. So the linguistics, like they gave me phonetical, you know, whole the yada yada. So wonderful. Those theories, they're pretty good. So that's teaching the language, the, you know, subject verb that, you know, the,
It's the grammar that we all love.
I am native speaker. Yeah, no, I mean,
College.
no, I mean, after I would say, you know, for me, the syntax is the tough, the syntax, I don't know how to say English.
Yep.
Syntax.
So what am I, as a native speaker, I remember when I learned the language because I was in the language. I was here. So every input was in English. So there was meaningful. I understood? No. After 6 months, I started getting those input was become comprehensive because before was only noise. You know, yeah.
And that's exactly
Exactly
what
it.
we're supposed to be doing with our kids.
Right.
But I
Except
think
we're holding their hand. We're being that friend that you needed when you arrived here, who would have sat down with you and said, oh yeah, oh no, here, this is what that means, or this is the part of the picture that that's talking about, or would have been like explaining things to you and helping you understand.
was explained to me, but you don't have to ask questions because, for example, someday somebody say, "What's up?" I look at the ceiling and say, "What do you mean with the, what is up is the ceiling?" After a little while, I realized that what's up is I say hello. And any items, the idioms, I don't know what it is about. Sometimes they say
It's
something.
so wonderful that you had that experience, you know.
I have the experience. I think all of you have experience because you teach foreign language, though. You know what it is about. So saying that, sometimes for me, for example, I try to speak Spanish, but I feel like, you know, I improve my English. So what I want to use a technique of balance because I know that we go to this approach. For me, I will say from the door to the end, everything is Spanish. Because if I don't want to teach linguistic approach, I'm not going to teach subject verb now. I can teach Spanish, you know, I can do here. In the beginning, they're going to be lost.
No, you don't want your students to be lost. You don't want them to be lost.
It's about
Doing what you can so that
It's
they're
about
not lost.
simplifying.
You're
That's the equilibrium. That one, equilibrium is the setting where the
conundrum,
No, the balance.
balance, yeah.
There is a balance, but like when they're beginning, like it's hard even for me sometimes, and especially like now, because our kids, I told them, I think we started in February because everything we did the first half of the year, I don't think they know. But like you just start very, very simple and then build on that for your very beginning students. And it's not about like, you don't teach the verb decir, which means to say, and the yo form is digo and blah, 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 blah. You would teach dice as he or she says, and then you go, ah, la muchacha dice hola, and you go from there, if that makes sense. And then you build in the yo form, and then you build in the other forms as well. So it's almost like each verb form is vocabulary rather than grammar.
Because right now I'm using realidad. Realidad I start to building from little by little. Start to do
Right. And there's actually TPRS books with realidades. Like Karen Rowan, who is, their stories aren't great, but they're not terrible. And Karen Rowan's like one of the gurus in CI. Do you have one or two?
But you said you don't like teaching stories, right, Dan? You're not like a story kind of person?
No, history. I don't like history.
Oh,
History. I don't like to gossip around the people that don't know. I don't know history. No, history. History is the one. You know what I mean? I don't want to talk about Washington. I don't know those things. I mean, with all the respect, all of you know. So I don't like history. No, I don't like. I'm engineer first. So I am more numbers. Let's go for it. Story, I can talk a little bit, you know, short story. I have one here which I like because it's bilingual. It's from a book I have. I'm not gonna show it because it's from a book. They said a student opened la puerta, you know, Spanglish.
but how does that help your children learn Spanish?
Ah,
How does that help them? Like, are you going to use that with students? You would use it with students?
I don't know yet. Should I?
No?
No. What I need to know is basically which I think I know, but it's more the logic. I am very logic and very, you know, have to make sense. It doesn't make sense doesn't make sense for anybody. I mean,
We have to get going. I think
Yeah,
everybody
because
has to
there's
get
all
going.
sorts of different ways in
But-
doing CI, and there's not necessarily one correct way. And I'm gonna say I think I'm sort of CI because I do some of the other stuff because for my SUNY Albany class we have to. And I think if you sometimes too in these small schools, if you don't do, because they're very all about the input and not about producing things, but sometimes you have to have one class that produces something because on a crazy day you might go nuts. I know Naomi might not agree with me, but there's just some days where, you know, sometimes they need to draw out a story. I mean, they're still getting input, but it's not necessarily the same input, or sometimes they're taking that and building onto a story. So, but there's all sorts of different ways to do CI. It's just figuring out which way works best for you and how to put it in there. Like write and discuss. I have still not figured out how to do that without boring my kids. But some of the other stuff I can do, or I feel they're bored. Maybe it's, you know,
Yeah.
it's not really happening.
I saw.
I'm gonna run too, so have a good afternoon. We
Okay.
need to have one of these times where we can.
All right. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you so much. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Erin. Have a good
Bye-bye.
evening.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Erin,
Yes.
is the chat going to show up on the recording?
No, but I can save the chat if you would like.
Could you? Because I think, I don't know, I think there might have been some information in the chat that I should read.
Yeah, I can save that for you and send it over to you.
Ah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right, thank
Have a
you.
great afternoon.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.